the feminine is to descend just like we birth children. So can you share a little bit about how we can use, rather than necessarily always holding up and on the inhale, doing more of the exhales and releases?
This is how it was taught to me, literally, was that like I had this dormant energy. So if we actually want to be down and in the body, this is the biggest reframe I like to offer folks is.
Brett Larkin is a leading yoga teacher and founder of Uplifted Yoga, an online platform that has certified thousands of instructors worldwide. Known for her work in prenatal and Kundalini yoga, she is empowering a global community to live more mindfully and integrate yoga into their daily lives.
Usually the yoga style that you're attracted to initially is not the one that you need to find balance.
In Tantra, they say, instead of what most of us do when we're going to orgasm, we tense, we hold our breath to have a tipping point. And it's like, imagine you have a little teacup and you filling that teacup up with water. Well, it doesn't take much water to overflow, and you have trust, flow, surrender, let go. Trust, flow, surrender, let go. Trust, flow, surrender, let go. I'm the one I've been waiting for. Welcome back to the Highest Self Podcast. My name is Sahara Rose, and on this podcast, I love to take spiritual concepts but make them really grounded, fun, relatable, so they can actually serve your needs. And my path of spirituality has been the path of the body, the path of the feminine. Like I say in one of my songs, the feminine is rising, the body is the path. The feminine is rising, so I'm gonna throw it back. And that's really what we practice, what we preach around here. And the beauty of taking this more feminine approach to spirituality is it's a lot more gentle, easeful, fluid. It allows us to really feel what is present within ourselves rather than trying to get to a goal. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have like gone to, a yoga class or tried to do a meditation. And then you're like, I'm not good at this. Like, I can't do these poses. I can't meditate. Must not be spiritual. I have to work really, really hard on this and push myself. And we have that same mindset that we've been trained to have from our school system of there's a right or wrong way. And if I just push myself harder, then I'll reach the goal being enlightenment. And that's missing the whole point of all of this. To me, even what does spirituality mean? Spirituality means to be connected with all that is, to be connected to your heart, to be connected to community, to be one with all of life. And that's actually what the word tantra, a lot of you guys may call it, it means to weave with. And it was the spiritual path of that more feminine, they call it the left-handed path, because it wasn't about the separation and, I need to be on top of the mountain by myself with no interaction with the outer world. That's a monk path. Some people may want to take that, but I'm assuming if you're here looking at my cute outfits, you don't. Because we want beauty, we want play, we want spontaneity, we want to be with friends, we want love. Like these are all things that if you can feel, it feels true in your heart, you are on a more left-handed, Shakti, divine feminine path. And it's really important because most of spirituality that we know of has been taught by men for men. And really negates the feminine experience that we are very differently wired. We are much more emotional. We are really in our bodies. So we have to also look at these ancient spiritual practices and look at, the ways that maybe the feminine has actually been removed from them. A lot of you guys might know I started my career in Ayurveda. I was an Ayurvedic practitioner for 7 years. And what I found was that a lot of even what we learn in Ayurveda schools was still hypermasculine because the feminine was taken out of it because of patriarchy, because of religious programmings. And we are now remembering that it's not so rigid of like, I'm a Vata dosha, so I can only eat these foods, and you're Pitta and you're Kapha, and like these labels and identities and right and wrongs and lists that we put upon ourselves because we're trained that's how you're supposed to be. But it's rather like using these systems as base points, but then letting your intuition guide you. So I'm going to be real with you guys. I have been in the spiritual world now for over a decade, but Kundalini yoga was something that I had tried. I had a friend that was very into it, but every time I went to the class, it felt really overwhelming for my nervous system. I remember 10 plus years ago when I was living in India, I went to a Kundalini class and the girl next to me was having like a full on like Kundalini Awakening, I would say, but it wasn't properly held in her energy system, that she was kind of like screaming and there was just like a lot of energy moving through her and we were all like holding hands and I was next to her. And after that, I felt like I got hit by a car. Like I just took on a lot of that. And after that experience, I kind of stayed away from it. And then, dance more so became my spiritual pathway. But a dear friend of mine who you're going to be learning from, Brett Larkin, is really bringing back the feminine approach to Kundalini. And she's going to be speaking about how actually the truth of Kundalini is not about this kind of like militaristic way that we've been trained. She'll share the history of why it has become this way today, but it's actually about coming down and moving into the body, which I think a lot of us have noticed too in these, meditations we've been taught is like higher pineal gland, but actually the feminine path is more of the exhale, the release and going into the womb. So I'm really excited to dive into all these topics today with not just Kundalini, but like straight yoga extraordinaire. She's been one of my besties for like 8 years. Like we go way back when we were both like starting our businesses, and she's a mother of 2 and, has been able to really allow more people to access Kundalini and bringing it in this more palatable and feminine way. And before we drop into this episode, be sure to hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. That is the best way to stay up to date on the latest episodes. We've got this in video format, so if you're just hearing my voice, be sure to also watch our fabulous outfits on video as well on Spotify, YouTube, or the Apple Store. This is the best way to stay in the flow with future conversations and also allows the podcast to reach more people. So hit subscribe so I can keep vibing with you on all future episodes. Now let's get into this one. So welcoming Brett Larkin to the High Self Podcast.
Hi, I'm so happy to be with you and be here. Got my snakeskin leotard on.
Good,
so I'm
as
ready
you should,
for
as
this
you
combo.
should. Yes. Okay, so let's just dive right into why so many of us, when we experience what we go to modern Kundalini classes, kind of feel this jar in our nervous system and how we can do things differently.
Well, I relate to what you said about feeling jarred because I had the same experience. My first Kundalini class, everyone was wearing white. So there was like, everyone had this uniform appearance. There was a lot of chanting and there was a lot of rules. The Kundalini practice has a ton of structure, right? We open with a specific chant. Everyone has to dress a certain way. In traditional Kundalini yoga, you're supposed to practice before the sun rises. So between 3 and 5 a.m. And then you're moving through what's called kriyas, these specific sets of exercises, which are very prescriptive, like a recipe. It's like, do this pose for this amount of time with this mantra, with this drishti, and then rest for 45 seconds. So there's just so much. I'm almost feeling a little tense in my body as I describe like the structure and rigidity of the practice, which has so much value. But for so many of us, we come in and the way that this practice was designed is to raise energy. So if we want to just talk about the word snake is actually naga in Sanskrit. Kundalini is like the coil, right? So the paradigm that all of this is working in is that there is this Shakti energy, dormant, we'll go into that word, at the base of our spine, and it's supposed to move through the subtle body, so through the 7 chakras, up to meet Shiva, which would be consciousness or bliss through the crown chakra. So we have this model of ascension, essentially. And that's what most of the Kundalini we're experiencing is working with. It's like, how can we apply pressure, tension, stress, and friction to the system to cause this Kundalini to move upwards? And if this happens in a way that's too fast and too furious, you're going to get migraines, you're going to get headaches. We can start there and start picking apart a little bit, like who this was originally designed for. Let's talk about this ascension model and then how we maybe want to do things differently.
Yeah, so let's go into, because a friend of mine was a big Kundalini teacher and she studied it in India, and she was sharing that it was actually used for like the warrior trainings there. So can you share, and that's really what Yogi Bhajan's pathway of Kundalini and the Sikhs were the warriors of India. So can you share a little bit about the history of maybe why Kundalini has taken this more slant for this right now?
Well, we definitely see different types of yoga originating from different parts in India. So that's a great thing to talk about. Like in the South, they weren't defending the borders the way they were in the North. So a lot of times when we see something like warrior pose, it's because those were actually used as training exercises. Or in Kundalini yoga, we have like this horse stance or this squat that actually to me is very remnant of some work in like Tai Chi, right? So there's so much beautiful value in this practice. And if you're training and if you need to be strong, yeah, absolutely. It makes sense to put physical demands on yourself. And what's interesting about Kundalini yoga as compared to like Hatha and Vinyasa yoga, where Hatha Vinyasa is more concerned with the muscles, right? We're potentially flowing through postures. But I always see Hatha and Vinyasa yoga as like a precursor to meditation, right? Essentially, you're like doing these exercises, getting the wiggles out so you can then sit and meditate. Kundalini is like meditation in motion. It doesn't have this delineation the way Hatha yoga, if we want to look at like Patanjali's 8 limbs, for example, where it's like asana is like the first rung on the ladder, right? And then we move, we have the yamas, the niyamas, then we do breath work, then we meditate. It's kind of like step 1, 2, 3. Kundalini is kind of like, we're going to throw all that out and we're just going to do everything all at once. We are going to have the mantra, we're going to have the sound, we're going to have the chanting, we're going to have rhythmic motions, we're going to have powerful, powerful breath work, all in like one capsule, followed by another capsule, and then you rest in between. So while a Hatha class is like 90% asana, and then if you have a good teacher, hopefully they're like incorporating some meditation and breath work at the end for that last 10%. Kundalini is like equal parts. It's like 25% pranayama, 25% asana, 25%, moving the body. And it's very much also incorporating sound and meditation as the other piece. So you're doing everything at once.
Self-love is everything, queens. It is so needed on this journey. Relationships can come in and out of our lives. And even if we're in a relationship, it's like, no one's going to love you the way that you can. And that's why I wrote the song that you're listening to right now, the Self-Love Anthem. And I'm so excited to share that my new music video for it is officially out. If you're watching this on YouTube, Spotify video, you can see it on the screen. And this really is an ode to the feminine heart. We feel so freaking much. The heartbreak, the pain, the grief, but also the love, the joy, the possibility. And ultimately, we give away so much of our own power. And this really is a reclamation of that inner, not just power, but that inner sacredness that I feel so many of us, we pedestal other people, but do we pedestal ourselves? So this song really is all about that. So please be sure to check out the new music video for Self-Love Anthem. It is available on YouTube. You can find the link in the show notes, and I'm so excited to share it with you. What is your unique type of intuition? Are you someone that feels things in your body, sees a vision for something, hears a voice in your head, or just knows? This quiz is going to help you understand your unique intuitive type and how you can take action on it in creating a career that honors your intuitive gifts. All right, let's get into it. So trust your intuition, trust your inner wisdom, trust your inner guidance. Close your eyes and listen. Okay, got it. So now let's talk about this ascension model and where that came from and how we can bring a more descension. And the word descension to people might sound negative, but it actually is the feminine is to descend, just like we birth children, we bleed, we squat, we, twerk for me has been my spiritual practice. And it's like, these are all things that we're going lower to the earth, to the ground. And, I remember, years ago, I was speaking to this astrologer and he was talking about the path to ascension. I'm like, I feel like I'm on the path to descension. He was like shocked that I said that. And I'm like, because that's the path of the feminine. So can you share a little bit about how we can use, rather than necessarily always holding up and on the inhale, doing more of the exhales and releases?
Yes, absolutely. So we have this model where this is how it was taught to me, literally, was that like I had this dormant energy. So basically, like if I didn't play with this energy or wake it up, I was like a zombie or an asleep person, that I had to awaken, move up my chakras to unite with universal consciousness, which, as you said, if we don't want to be a monk, That's probably not like so much of ancient yoga is about disassociating from the body in order to prepare for reincarnation. That's what a lot of these practices were designed to do. So if we actually want to be down and in the body, this is the biggest reframe I like to offer folks is, first of all, it's not a Kundalini awakening that we're all experiencing. It's a Kundalini reawakening, right? Because this energy is your birthright. It was free flowing at birth. And the Kundalini energy is actually an orbit. So it's been talked about as this thing that you need to wake up and move. But really, when you were born, the Kundalini was free flowing. Like if we look at children, they are creative. They are happy and playing and unfettered and free. And they don't have any of the conditioning that we have. And then what happens? They're told, you need to do your homework. You need to sit still. You need to come inside. As a kid, you learn, okay, certain behaviors earn me love. Certain behaviors don't. And that Kundalini that was free flowing at birth, this beautiful orbit that's up Sushumna Nadi through the chakras, down Ida, Pingala, and the vagus nerve. So what we're looking for is to feed a healthy orbit, which means it's going down as much as it's going up. That somehow got abandoned. And what happens is, as I learn from my parents and society what's acceptable and not acceptable, or maybe I experience trauma, that free-flowing orbit begins to shrink, get distorted, or warble, right? Like because of different bracing patterns that I develop, both in my fascia and maybe at the level of each chakra. And instead of being this big, healthy, beautiful orbit loop, I also think of the Kundalini awakening as like your uniqueness, 10 out of 10, right? So you're a perfect example of someone who has been like in a Kundalini awakening, right? Because I loved you before, and like seeing what you've been doing the past couple of years, it's like you're more Sahara now than you ever were before. Not that you weren't yourself before, but it's like the volume is up. You're so expressed, you're so free. And that's like that orbit is so big and powerful. And I think that's why so many people are drawn to you, right? And they want to listen to your music and want to be around you. So for each of us, this Kundalini is our birthright. And it's not like it's this dormant, lazy thing. It's like life happened to us in this orbit that was full is now a little bit off kilter. It almost reminds me of like how we have our Prakriti in Ayurveda, and then we're trying to get back to it. It's the same idea here. And I think that's such an important reframe because—
And for people who don't know what Prakriti means, can you share that?
Yes. Well, I mean, you're the expert who's written books on it, but sure, girl, make me share about it. It's like you when you were born, you at your perfect balanced state, essentially. And then life happens and your Vakriti comes into play, which is kind of how you're operating now with your constrictions and your bad habits and your coping mechanisms and all of the things. So when we think of it as an orbit, to me, it's so much more exciting. And when we think of it as something that's our birthright, and it's something like my Kundalini awakening is going to look different from yours, is going to look different from Jennifer, who's listening to this, because it's an unfurling of your essential you-ness. That's the other thing that I think was missing when this was presented to me. It was like, oh, this is a spiritual awakening. And then it's like this ecstasy state that's kind of the same for everyone. When really it's about like you moving and walking through the world as your highest, most embodied self, which is going to be so unique to you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I definitely, after my divorce and the shock of it, it was a death and a rebirth that was a Kundalini awakening without me doing a practice. It was like life gave me. It wasn't a practice. It threw me in the deep end of it. So I'm curious, how do people have these spontaneous Kundalini awakenings?
Yeah, well, that's something I get asked a lot about. And so basically this energy wants to move, it's designed to orbit, and then you start doing yoga, let's say, and you're moving. All yoga is awakening Kundalini, even if it's not Kundalini yoga, in quotes, right? Because you're starting to twist the body, you're doing heart openers, right? Things are changing at a subtle body level, and maybe there was a blockage somewhere in the heart chakra or in your fascia, and it opens, and all of a sudden that energy is able to flow through a little bit more smoothly. So there's kind of this baby step approach, but some people never even set foot on a yoga mat and have what's called a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, where it's like a car accident or a breakup or a divorce or a traumatic birth experience. And this energy starts to, it's like something changes at a subtle body level, and it's like a lot of water was dammed up, and then it's like, right? Like all of this energy surging, but they don't have the pranic capacity to orbit that energy yet, right? Because remember, we want an orbit. We don't, contrary to popular belief, we want an orbit. We don't want just up. So all of a sudden they're flooding. It's almost like their circuit board is overpowered, right? And that's when you're getting the migraines. Some people have tingling, headaches. It can be debilitating. I mean, I had a friend who we co-authored an article on my blog because he had a Kundalini awakening where he literally couldn't work. He had to quit his job and just lie on the floor. I'm not kidding. After a breakup, caused by a breakup, because he was just experiencing so much energy in his low back and pelvis. So that's one way it can look, but that is somewhat traumatic. I mean, one of the definitions of trauma is like too much, too soon, too fast, too like overwhelming. But then I feel like there's this other camp of people who are saying, I've been doing yoga, I've been doing meditation, I'm listening to Sahara's music, I'm, practicing with me on YouTube, like I'm doing all the things and I'm not feeling anything. What's wrong with me? Like they want the awakening or they want those big feelings, but it doesn't seem like anything is happening. And to those folks, I want to tell you, yes, there's some people who have these, spontaneous and huge energy releases that then it's a lot to deal with because you need to figure out like how to drive. It's like being put in a Maserati and not knowing how to drive, right? It's going to be a nightmare as you like try to navigate the clutch and figure out like, how do I circulate and harness this energy? But for others of us, it's very slow. And I feel like I'm living like a 30-year Kundalini awakening. I have not had like a big, super powerful experience. I've had some really amazing meditations, but it hasn't been to the level of like Kundalini syndrome, right? Where I'm feeling ill and experiencing tense migraines, nor is that what we want because we want to be able to play with this energy gradually and slowly. So every time you make a choice to cultivate the opposite, let's say, like do something against your ingrained tendencies or behavior. Every time you choose to breathe into your heart instead of yell at your partner. Every time you just wake up a little earlier and do a couple breaths to meditate, like all of that is contributing to the Kundalini awakening. It doesn't have to be this big fancy thing. It's like what you're going to start to feel 1% more yourself, shedding these past conditions and programming, hence the snake, the snake sheds its skin over a very long period of time. And it will feel like nothing's happening. But that's why it's so important to be in community with a teacher or with other friends who can say, like, you are so different than 5 years ago. Maybe it's slow, but I see you are changing. You are doing things that you would not normally do. And I'm proud of you.
Yeah, like going back to that experience I had 10 years ago in India for that girl next to me she was having that experience. It was too much, too fast. And she had a lot going on in her life. She was from Egypt and then she was kind of like trying to find an answer. So she was really forcing herself. And I think there was a lot of suppressed pains and traumas that were all coming out. And I'm very energy sensitive. So because I was next to her, I was just like picking up on all of it. And now I could see that probably for her doing that like push, and especially when the group of people together probably wasn't the right practice for her, and then for me, now I also know I never do things in really big groups because I'm like, I naturally just become the healer. So it's almost like my soul, like, I did a medicine ceremony and I was just like tuned into everyone else's experience. And so now I know a lot of my deepest work and practice is by myself. Mm-hmm. Because that's when I can just be in my own energy. Whereas even if there's like someone else, I'm such an empath that I start tuning into what they're feeling.
And to go into that woman and potentially what her experience was, the way I would describe what was happening there is that she did a lot of intense Kundalini practices that removed blockages in her system that just revealed the Kundalini that was already there, that's been free-flowing since birth. But again, it was kind of like that dam where it was like, whoa, too much too soon. And she didn't have the ability to properly channel that energy. It's kind of like being on a runaway horse, right? If you don't have horsemanship skills to harness and recirculate and ground, that energy, you're going to have that kind of overwhelming experience that she was having, which is ultimately, this is what yoga and meditation is about, right? So we can ride the wave of this like incredible frequency that we are, that's so unique to us, that's so delicious and sexy and good in our body, and bring it up and bring it down and ground. So we have that current of liberation, mukti, and that current of manifestation, bhukti, going down. And so much of the Kundalini practice that was given to us by Yogi Bhajan was focused on this energy ascension, bringing energy up to the pineal, to the pituitary gland. And the logic behind that, all of this has value because the pineal and pituitary gland, the pituitary is the master gland of the body, meaning that it's secreting the hormones and peptides that are resulting in your current mood. So how we're feeling right now is dictated by that. So it makes sense in some ways. It's like, okay, we want to draw energy up to our third eye. But then when you look at some of these Kundalini movements, if people aren't familiar, it's a lot of like repetitive movements. Like a classic one is like the torso twist, where you're kind of poking and provoking polarity. You're moving fast, you're moving rhythmically. And then you stop at the end of the exercise, inhale, and apply root lock, which is like mula bandh, lifting the pelvic floor in order to kind of like siphon energy up the spine. And a way I've been using to help people picture this is like, do you remember going to those fairs as a kid where you like whack, you have like a big hammer and you whack the thing and the energy goes up, right? It's forceful. And what I have discovered is that, sure, you can force the Kundalini to rise this way. But the more feminine approach would be to invite it to come out and play, to soften, to slow down, maybe to spiral. And we see like Sufi grind is one of my favorite, like, well, let's just do it right now. One of my favorite Sufi grind. It's one of my favorite, like more feminine form Kundalini moves because it's kind of inviting this energy so we can receive it, right? It's like, it reminds me of like one of your music videos where you're like with the snake, right? It's like, do we want to gently play with this energy or do we want to force it up like an ejaculation, like it has to happen like a volcano exploding from our head? That is the old model, right? The new model is like, how can I circulate this energy? And breath of fire, do we want to talk about breath of fire?
Yes.
Okay. So breath of fire is a, classic. It's like the marquee Kundalini pranayama.
Can you share what it is?
Yes. Breath of fire is a rapid exhale out the nose, and the inhale is passive. And you snap the navel back to the spine in a percussive. If we want to talk about like forcing energy up, it is the classic pranayama for that, right? Because the belly is pumping. It's a core workout. Now, is breath of fire beautiful? Yes. I don't practice it that much anymore. I don't, because it is really one of those forcing energy up practices. And a lot of women, at least in my community, are high vata, right? And that doesn't mean we can never do breath of fire, but it's like, if you are, what are you doing after to really ground that energy? Like a really nice combo could be breath of fire and then doing Sitali pranayama, which is inhaling through the mouth. I think most of the breaths where we inhale through the mouth tend to be more feminine. That water breath and out through the nose. So if we look at some of these kriyas, a lot of them are like very intense breath of fire, very intense core work. The Kundalini practice, a lot of the poses are also kind of like acupuncture in motion. So you're doing things like holding your arms out for really long periods of time. And it's almost like your arms or your legs are these acupuncture needles. So you're kind of doing like a self-adjust. But again, one of the classic Kundalini phrases is like, keep up. And it's almost like grin and bear it as you keep your arms lifted for so long. And again, is there value in that? Yes, just like an acupuncture needle would adjust the flow of energy because Kundalini is dealing with the subtle body and the meridians. Sure, holding my arms up like this is going to direct energy down into my heart. But if I start feeling exhausted or start talking like in a negative shame spiral because it's too hard for me, or maybe I have a shoulder injury, that's where these prescriptive practices of like, you have to do this for 3 minutes with breath of fire while thinking this specific mantra, it can become like the rigidity of the practice and all the rules, I think, can become a crutch for people who just want answers, who want to be told what to do. And a lot of women ask me about breath of fire on their period. And I love what you talked about earlier. This feminine flow, the down and out with the menstrual cycle, that's the apanavayu. So the current, there's different ways that prana moves in our body, but apanavayu is the downward current. Think like birth, menstruation, pooping, right? This is a necessary current. And if you're doing breath of fire on your period, you're kind of going against the natural intelligence of your body. There's no physical reason why you can't do it. It's an energetic reason. Energetically, during your cycle, your body's trying to shed the uterine lining, going down and out. So to be like, okay, we're going to do a ton of active breath work, that's like the reverse of that pattern. It's up to you. Everyone can make their own choice, but like from a pranic perspective, it's not congruent. It doesn't make the most sense.
Are you craving a more feminine approach to spirituality that honors the full you? I'm talking about your inner embodiment queen, your joy priestess, your wise woman, your intuitive oracle. Well, if you love the themes on this podcast, in my Sacred Sisterhood collective, Rose Gold Goddesses, we dive even deeper every month with a Zoom Goddess Circle. In these Goddess Circles, taught by myself and some of your favorite High Self podcast guests, we actually take the teachings here from this podcast, but bring them into practice, such as mapping out your past lives, healing your ancestral lineage, connecting with your dark feminine, channeling from your highest self, manifesting greater abundance, womb healing, wisdom, and clearing, and working with many goddess archetypes such as Isis, Hathor, Saraswati, Lakshmi, Yemaya, the list goes on. This truly is a mystery school that I have been running for over 6 years now and is filled with hundreds of workshops, goddess circles, and practices that support the sacred feminine within you. And we have our very own app so you can connect with other like-hearted queens all around the world. So if you're interested in joining or learning more, doors are open right now for Rose Gold Goddesses. Head over to rosegoldgoddesses.com. That's Rose Gold Goddesses, plural. You could also find that link in the show notes. As soon as you join, you walk through the 5 pillars of Rose Gold Goddesses, dive deep into your divine feminine embodiment, and then have hundreds of workshops available for you. Plus, you'll receive our calendar to join me live in our next monthly Goddess Circle. I'm so excited to have you there. Again, head over to rosegoldgoddesses.com and you can find that link in the show notes. Even doing headstands and handstands when you're on your period it's not allowing that flow, but even doing core work.
Yeah.
Because we're not trying to tense up our core when we're bleeding, but we're trying to loosen and soften. So, in Ayurveda, they say, just walk, and stretch, but not really upside down things. And I think it's important that we shift things with our menstrual cycle, which could be a whole other podcast. And I also want to talk about, I really love breath work. And I've tried different breath works. And, I know Dr. Joe Dispenza and a lot of people really resonate, but every time I've done the breath work, it's very similar to, it's an inhale, it holds on the inhale. And I try and it never really, my body really rejects it actually. And for me, that's why I like Wim Hof breath work, which is interesting because it's another man. So, because before I was like, maybe men's energy systems, because they're, more ascension oriented and the feminine paths, like maybe they just do better with the inhale holds. But Wim Hof is also a very like masculine, teaching philosophy man. I don't even know what to call him, but it's on the exhale. So you're doing that powerful breath, but it's through the mouth. Wim Hof breath is through the mouth. And so you're doing that, but it's quite slow. So you're like, and most people end up moving. Like I'm kind of like waving my body forward and back, almost like a Sufi grind, but in a forward and back rocking motion.
Yeah, it's an undulation.
It's an undulation, and it really is coming from my core, and the rest of my body's following. And then I inhale in, I hold the inhale for a bit, but the long hold is on the exhale. And I feel myself melt, my shoulder tension melt, myself soften, and I can go for so long without breathing. It amazes me when I use the timer. And I try not to use the timer because that could take me back into the how long was my breath hold,
Let's compete. Let's start
exactly. Track it. But just letting myself, just unwind. And it's the same with sexual energy. Like in Tantra, they say, instead of what most of us do when we're going to orgasm, we tense, we hold our breath, we hold our shoulders to have a tipping point. And it's like, imagine you have a little teacup and you filling that teacup up with water. Well, it doesn't take much water for the teacup to overflow, and you have a little orgasm, a petit mort, as the French say, the little death. But let's say you want to expand, then you're going to have a little short clitoral peak orgasm that might last you 3 seconds tops. And that's what most people experience for their entire lives.
Well, let's talk about some more feminine form movements that we can put into Kundalini. And then there's a breath thing that I think we should try.
Yes.
So, right away, the undulation. If we think about how, this is how snakes move, this is how sperm moves, DNA is a spiral. Like we just see spirals and undulations everywhere in nature. So it's really funny because I went to White Tantric, which is like the ultimate Kundalini thing you can do, where you go and you're with like 140 other people, and they put you in these grids, and you have to wear a turban and you have to wear white. It's like rules, rules, rules. And we were working with a partner doing these very intense kriyas and looking into each other's eyes.
You guys are like in the river, right? In the freezing cold river doing them, I heard.
I did it in a church, but I'm sure you could do it in a river. But it's very structured to this. Like even the partners, the groups of partners were on a particular grid. And you're supposed to keep up and not let your partner down. And I had a lot of energy, and I was able to do some very hard things, like hard arm holds where my arms were up for, like 30 minutes, things. But the way I was able to do it is I was moving just a little bit the whole time, And when there was a lunch break, I was talking to some other people at the event, and I was saying, I'm so proud of myself. I did that 30-minute hold. I was able, I was just doing this slight movement. And this guy was like, that's cheating. I kid you not. He was like, that's cheating. You need to be completely still. That is a coping mechanism, blah, blah, blah. And that stayed with me, Sahara, for years. Lo and behold, I was actually...
It was a man who told you this.
Of course it was. It was like, it was a man Kundalini teacher. So I took what he said seriously because he was a teacher as well.
Girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, lo and behold, like 6 years later, I'm like, I was doing feminine form Kundalini. I wasn't doing the pressure, tension, stress, and friction down to make something force up. I was playing with it. I was titrating with it. I was able to stay in this like really challenging posture through, coaxing the Kundalini to come out and play with me. So when I teach a more feminine form Kundalini class, which is basically all the classes on YouTube at this point, I'm inviting in, moving as nature. So undulations and spirals is something you want to invite in. Touch as something you want to invite in. Like do Sufi grind in a butterfly hug. Do Sufi grind with your hands stroking your face. Get your hands in your hair, right? Like all of these things make it feel so sensual. And we have all these nerve endings in our hands, which of course we can use for structured mantra or mudra practice, like great idea. But also if we just like add the element of touch to even something like a spinal flex, like the spinal flex I teach now, I have us stroke our thighs as we inhale and come forward, and stroke from knee to, pelvis as you come back. There's so many different ways we can play with touch. You can touch with your whole hand. You can touch with one finger. You can touch with the fingernail. You can just trace your lips. You can do like a tickly touch. You can, some Kundalini Kriyas have you actually pound the body like this, but just inviting in touch, inviting in undulation, inviting in spirals, inviting in rocking. Rocking is so soothing. And I think that's what I was kind of self-soothing in a lot of these movements and still getting that energy, flowing. And this is a big reframe that we haven't even talked about yet, but it's like the show and the point of all of this isn't the explosion out the crown of the head, unless we're preparing for the next life and wanting to disassociate and leave our bodies, which we don't if we're in this community. The thing we're trying to get to is the love story within us of this Shakti energy and the Shiva energy making love in our heart center. And if we look at the heart chakra, we see that yantra of the Star of David, which is representing these two energies, the current of liberation and the current of manifestation, in union in the heart. And when we think of the Kundalini Awakening at the heart, it makes so much more sense that this is an orbit and that we need to focus on grounding practices. And you asked a little bit about the history of why are these these practices so focused on ascending energy? And this is something I've heard. I don't know. I wasn't there. But when Yogi Bhajan first came to the US, a lot of the people he was working with were people coming off of drugs in the 60s and the 70s. And so if someone's coming off of heroin and I need to teach them yoga, I'm going to do something that's incredibly intense.
Yeah, make them feel high.
And make them feel high. And it's interesting because again, this is just me, but as I look at his kriyas moving forward, and I don't really teach Yogi Bhajan kriyas anymore after the whole show of what happened there. But back when I was studying his work more deeply, I noticed that even the kriyas he was teaching towards the end of his life, like if you in the 90s, were more grounding. Because at that point he was teaching a more like general population. So I always say, if you are working with the Kundalini Research Institute, which is his company, KRI, Yogi Bhajan System, look at the date of the kriya that you're looking at in a book. Because not always, but a lot of times those ones that are more in like the late 80s, 90s aren't as intensely energizing as the ones from the 60s and 70s.
Well, I noticed that most people who are very drawn to that traditional Kundalini yoga had dealt with addictions.
Yes.
Whether they were friends of mine or influencers or people that so I noticed that trend. So that's interesting to now know that, oh, he actually did create those kriyas for that and that's what they kept talking about. It makes you feel high. And some people maybe are more biologically wired to have, some people are much more into psychedelics and experiences that they want to feel high. Some people are a lot more kapha that they don't want to feel that. But what I find is we often are gravitated to things that we have too much of already, So it's like that person who's already like hyper militaristic, perfectionist, pushes themselves, goes to all the intense exercise classes and hits and this and that. And then they want to feel high on the Kundalini. It's like it's so much pitta, it's so much fire energy. It's a combustion. Maybe that person who's very kapha, earthy, they take it slow. At the yoga class, they opt out of everything. They go into Shavasana early. They could actually really benefit from this practice.
Yes. I talk about this in my book too, which quotes your book on Ayurveda, because it's all about cultivate the opposite, right? We learn that from Ayurveda and we see that in yoga as well. Usually the yoga style that you're attracted to initially is not the one that you need to find balance. Like I am the perfect example of this as someone with high pitta. Like I was attracted to hot yoga initially. Of course, it felt natural to push myself that hard, but it wasn't serving me. It wasn't bringing me into balance. And after those classes, I would feel so depleted. It's like, I'd ace the hot yoga class and then I'd spend the rest of the day on the couch because I was exhausted. So I see the same thing, like with the people coming into our Kundalini teacher training. It's like they're little junkies in a way, right? Who have high vata, that feeling's familiar.
Oh, I was the biggest Ashtangi.
Yeah, so it's easy for them to get high, right? And it's a familiar feeling. So that like attracts like. You crave what feels familiar and you're naturally good at. So a lot of this is, here we're talking about self-awareness, right? Knowing what your innate tendencies are, which Ayurveda is so great, and cultivating the opposite of what we want so we can get what we truly need.
I was doing so much Ashtanga yoga, which is, 3-hour Mysore practice every day. I was a raw vegan, super vata imbalanced, like lost so much weight. All I did was read spiritual texts, like so deep in it. And I did not get my period for 2 years. And then I learned that Ashtanga was actually given to the prepubescent boys to calm them down. So they would sit down and focus, and it was also used as a military training. And it's interesting because just going back to what you said of bringing in more self-touch, that is actually what healed me from my divorce. Like intuitively, I would just like wake up in the morning and play a song and just like stroke my arms, especially, being single for the first time. And I was in a 7-year relationship, a 4-year relationship after that. So I was really in relationship my whole life. So I was used to touch from another. So giving that touch to myself, it would just soothe my nervous system. And then I would start to embody. And for me, it was more through my embodiment practice of just moving my body, which is, really the same thing of moving my body, touching my face the way that I would a lover, stroking. And I would like give myself butterflies, like I would give myself that feeling of like someone else, but it was coming from me. And I didn't have to like just jump into a relationship so quickly because I wanted to feel that feeling, which is what so many of us do.
And I would describe everything you're doing there as the Kundalini Awakening unfurling within you. And I think this is a great point to maybe transition to talk a little bit about, we don't want to villainize Kundalini yoga. It's like all yoga has so much more in common than it does different, right? And I love Kundalini yoga, obviously. But when we hear that word Kundalini, right, we think white, we think turban, we think man, we think rules, we think structure, we think, all the things. But what the Kundalini Awakening is really about is like that love story of your Shakti or divine feminine energy and your masculine energy making love to each other. And when you talked about that kind of practice, that's what was coming to mind for me. Like, we want these energies in an orbit, dancing together, really united at the heart center, playing to each other's strengths. And this is very practical. So, I mean, just to use a silly example, but I often, if I'm not sure what to do, like, I'll actually ask, like, what would my Shakti energy have me do? And what would my Shiva energy have me do? How can they complement and do each of their roles best to support me? So if we think of Shakti as the creative feminine force that's experiencing life, that is all that is, her role is to constantly want and desire more love, right? And to feel things fully and to emote and to have desires. And then the role of our Shiva energy, or that more masculine energy, is to create structure for those desires, to create depth and containment. And I feel like the masculine energy is always seeking more freedom, right? So in a silly practical example, let's say, because so many women in my community, and I'm sure yours as well, they tell me they're overwhelmed. And that is like an excess of the Shakti feminine energy, in my opinion, right? Where it's like, we're feeling too much. We haven't asked our Shiva, our divine masculine energy, to come online for us and create structures and containers in the forms of setting boundaries, in the form of controlling our calendars, so that the feminine Shakti us, that is the river, can feel held by the river banks. And so often we project that onto someone else. We're like, oh, my partner should provide that for me, or my parents, or my sister, or my mom, or my job. And really, when we realize that, like, it's you and you, it can be so beautiful. So like, if I have this pure desire, just to make this like a silly example, if I have the pure desire for a massage, which I always do because I love being touched,
Yes.
that could be like a feminine pure desire, that Shakti energy that I have. And then I could ask my inner masculine, right, my inner Shiva energy, to make that happen. And it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde, right? You can be like both and talk to each other and be like, okay, my love, you want a massage? I will be your hero. I'm going to cancel all the rest of the meetings you have for today. I'm going to write those hard emails, tell everyone you're unavailable. I'm going to research like where you can have an opening and make some phone calls and get you scheduled in. And I'm going to pre-order dinner for you to pick up on the way home. And then you can be like, thank you, my love. I feel so held by you. But you need to play both roles. And I think this is where we get mixed up. And then if we don't, we project the role that we're not fulfilling onto other people. And that's where it all goes haywire.
That's such a great example, because even as you said that, I'm like, where can I find a man that does this? And it's like, you gotta be that. And it's like, yes. Because if we are waiting for it, we're actually repelling of it. Because it's then that, but that toxic feminine energy sometimes. It's like, what are you going to do for me? Are you going to this? Are you going to that? And then like reprimanding and forcing, which then the masculine feels that sense of pressure and a loss of the sense of freedom. And instead, like the highest of the feminine energy is to like inspire.
Yes. And this is what's so confusing when we start talking about these energies, is because they are so primal and because they defy gender, right? Like we all have these energies within us, regardless of how you define yourself, right? Like, there are toxic mimics of these energies in society everywhere. And I had so much fun like doing a write-up on this, but we have that like hot mess energy of the feminine who's like, she's emoting, but and experiencing, expressing, but it's too much, right? It is not grounded. Same with the masculine, right? We have that like, the man who's like overly aggressive, right? But that's a toxic mimic of, the hero or the warrior who creates structure, right? For his beloved. So it's so easy to get confused and twisted. And then like the classic myth that we're all in, the lie we tell ourselves, is that we shouldn't have to be both roles. And it's a really hard fantasy to wake up from. But when you can, it's like your relationship, the polarity in your, relationship with someone else will improve. This changed my marriage. When I was like, I need to come to this as a whole person and like have this love story within me. And it can be very sexy. Like that's why when you were describing that practice of you just working with yourself and working with your own energy and then setting boundaries. And I mean, I spend so much time with my calendar these days, you would make fun of me, but that's my inner divine masculine, like protecting the creative goddess that is me, who needs time to restore, who needs time to work on my, passions and musics and trainings and all the things. Like he's looking out for me and looking at that calendar and it's like, my love, you're going to be depleted next Wednesday unless we move some stuff around. So that ability to be both is really like that. I think like our highest calling. And then we show up to a relationship with someone else whole.
Yes, it's so important. Like even with music, which we both love making, and you were asking me like, so like you're making music videos, like tell me more about that. And I was actually thinking earlier today, I'm like, because I stepped into my dharma, I learned how to create a business, I really channeled my masculine energy, I'm able to fund my own music videos and create art and like make like—
You're your own sugar daddy, baby.
I am my own sugar daddy. Thank you very much. A pretty cute one at that. And then I'm able to make my wildest dreams happen. Like literally like create Y2K worlds and dancing with 14-foot boas and like all of these things because whereas what most I see, especially women do, is we're waiting for someone else to pick us, to choose us. So we feel like we have to prove ourselves to get selected. And then whenever we have it, then we're in this constant fear that it might be taken away from us.
Yes. And then the other common pattern that I see, and I'm sure you do too, is like the woman who's disconnected from the feminine, like she is just all hustle. Like, I mean, and we both were there. Yep. We were there, like building our businesses.
We were there.
Girl.
We were like, okay, let's talk about our funnels. We were super in it.
And, like there's beauty in that. But if that's all you know how to do, then you come home at the end of the day. And, so much of, the women's movement, which, totally we're pro, but it asks women to do things that don't make sense for a feminine energy body, like working at a legal firm, like 10 hours a day and reading briefs and having to be like structured and contained. And of course you're burnt out and you're, controlling and, you're just, that's an energy like that you're typecast or locked in. And then you come home and you have that same energy, right? You're controlling, you're maybe anxious, you're not in touch with your body. And this is like where doing like a more feminine form Kundalini practice at the end of the day when you're transitioning to come back. Because if you want polarity in your relationship and you want to hold the feminine pole, there's times where my husband's been a hot mess and it's like, whoop, okay, I'm holding the masculine pole for him. But for most of the time, I prefer to be in the feminine and I prefer him to be in his masculine. That can't happen unless I'm very aware of my own energy. So, when I am in a work mode for a long time, I intentionally do a practice that has a lot of self-touch, that has a lot of spirals, like all the things we've been talking about, coaxing and playing with the Kundalini, just like I'd play with my hair, as opposed to a more rigid, regimented practice, which actually could really serve me when I'm setting up for my workday. Right? Like some breath of fire and a little more structure. So also just, know why you're practicing, at what time, for what purpose.
Even creating that structure in our bodies through creating muscle mass. So when I was big into Ashtanga, which for people who don't know, it's really about pushing your flexibility. And I'm naturally a hypermobile person, right? So of course I liked doing it because I was great at it. Yeah. I'm like, oh, get into weird pose. I am great at doing that. However, from overextending my wrist to this day, Brett, I, for 10 years, have not been able to put any pressure on my wrist. And no chiropractor or anyone has been able to solve it. I can't do like planks on my hands. I have to do everything on my fists from overextending it so much on that Ashtanga. And I would also constantly have my hips pop out of place. That every morning when I would wake up, I would have to bring my knees to chest and pop my hips back into place. And throughout the day, continue to readjust them, or they would literally be like out of the socket kind of. And it'd be this loud like, poof. And I just thought that's just how my body is and that's how I'm going to live. When I started doing strength training, building muscle, building that structure, building that foundation, building that masculine energy within myself, that has never, for years, that has never happened. If anything, I used to have to get a massage like every week because my back would hurt all the time. And now maybe once a month I get one. Like it's obviously still nice to have, but I don't feel I need it because I have this structure within my body that now I have to remind myself, okay, now stretch, and don't now only fall so much into that one. So it's really interesting how all exercise and movement that we're doing on our bodies is mimicking our energy.
Yeah, it's like the goal is balance. And I hate that word because I think balance is like an illusion. I think weave is like the better, because it's like we're never like, oh, Shiva and Shakti, you're perfectly balanced and, like maybe for a moment, right? But usually I'm in my workday and I need to be more in that potentially masculine energy. And then maybe I have a super emotional week, like it's the week before my period or whatever, and I'm tired and I just want to cuddle and emote and express and journal, right? Like we need to know the season and the time we're in and just have so much self-compassion that like it's a pendulum. I mean, I keep going like this, hence the snake skin, but it's like that's reality. Reality isn't like, oh, everything's in this perfect balanced state and then we're going to just keep it there. I mean, even in a yoga pose like tree pose, you're not still, even though it's a balancing pose. The muscles in your ankle are moving, the 26 bones in your feet, those muscles, like everything is like calibrating even to hold you in stillness. So I think if we can just, balance is the goal, but let go that it's something that we need to like hold or attain for a long period of time and just get more interested in like, how can we be the weaver? And how can I call on a lot of different energy textures to help me move through what I need to move through right now? And Kundalini is going to expand the amount of textures available to you, like no doubt.
So good. So where can listeners try your incredible Kundalini classes that you have on YouTube and the library of content that you have on there and your trainings and everything else?
My YouTube channel is just my name, Brett Larkin Yoga. You'll find me lots of Kundalini on there. Look for the ones that say like divine feminine if you listen to this conversation, because those are the ones you're going to want to do. And yeah, I offer yoga teacher training online in both the Vinyasa style and the Kundalini style. Sahara is in some of the trainings, baby Sahara.
Yes.
But they're so good. Everyone loves it when you talk about the Ayurvedic clock. And I have a book as well, Yoga Life, that's available everywhere books are sold.
Yay.
So that's where people can find me.
And we'll have those links below. Well, yeah, I realized I was like, I've been friends with you for longer than I had this podcast.
I think I had you on my podcast
and you were have a podcast.
And you didn't have a podcast. And then you're like, I'm thinking of starting one. And I was like, do it. So, I mean, I kind of want to take credit for this whole show, actually.
So that means I've known you for over 8 years.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It's crazy.
We've grown so much. Look at us thriving, but looking better and shinier than ever before, thanks to the feminine embodiment and Kundalini practices. All right. We'll have all of those links listed below. I'm so excited for you to dive in. I feel like a lot of us naturally are going through this journey on our own. I feel like there's definitely like a higher consciousness that's allowing us to have these same realizations of like, oh no, these old pathways are not serving us because this new paradigm of the feminine is ready. It is coming through. It's already happening. So I hope this conversation gives you some permission for things that you may have intuitively felt like, oh, it feels weird to like hold this thing for so long or be so rigid and this and that. And, I'm always that person at the yoga class who's like kind of like does my own thing a little bit. And sometimes the yoga teachers come yell at me and I'm just like, you know what? Like this isn't school. Like leave me alone. So maybe it just gives you permission to just like move around a little bit, make things more your own, feel your own energy body. I remember last year I shared a video of myself of my yoga practice, which is like lots of undulations. And you were like, you've been channeling the same thing. So it's this movement that is waiting to come through. So I hope this gives you that permission slip. And I would definitely follow along with Brett's practices because it gives you a really good place to start. So I will have all those links listed below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you love this conversation, please leave a review for it on the iTunes store. And as a free gift, I will send you my womb meditation, which is really great after this conversation to connect to your sacred womb space and ask her answers and receive her wisdom. So all you got to do is leave a review, tell us what you love, tell us what other topics you'd love for me to dive into, take a screenshot of that review and email it over to me at sahara@iamsahararose.com. You can find that email in the show notes. And I'm so excited to see you in the next one.
Trust your intuition, trust your inner wisdom, trust your inner guidance, close your eyes and listen. Swing to let go, swing to let go, swing to let go. So trust your intuition, trust your inner wisdom, trust your inner guidance, close your eyes.